Today, I loot the worst equipment off dead bodies and try to beat the game with it. Let's go! It all started as a marksmanship hunter in Kazan, punching worms in the depths of a dangerous cave. I often drove the luxurious streets wondering if I too could become a hero of my tale, and as I suddenly beat my fellow downtrodden citizens within an inch of their life for moolah, suddenly I would encounter a massive dragon forcing me into the hero role once again. Unfortunately, the equipment was off to a bad start, only netting a weakened axe, a sword just a moment later, and a shirt that barely had enough stats to save me from any fire that could rain down. But a volcano is erupting and I have no time to be picky, so I escaped on a boat only to discover that slavery would become my future. Kazan, despite its completion, would end my journey before it began. Or so I thought. Lesson 1 when becoming a hero is instead of giving up due to circumstances, you gotta find yourself crash landed on an island wondering how you'll become the hero of legend now. First, every hero needs a sidekick, and a turtle to travel the lonesome road is nice to have. Then they need allies, and while my sword isn't a bow, it certainly makes an effective weed whacker. And what better friends to make than a group of orcs so ravenous that they destroy your potential next outfit. But most importantly, a hero needs a sense of direction, and some skill to hold on to, and mine is, ironically, the ability to fire ranged weapons. Why is this ironic? Well, that's ultimately going to be up for you to decide. Oh, and let's not forget a cape. Heroes need capes too. On my adventure to discover myself, I also found that fish people wear shoes. They're also very progressive in letting old gods into their ranks, but alas, the biggest threat to face came from the ones that are my height as zombies mass approached from the umlaut threat. In response, the turtle I had befriended on the beach shore became the helper in destroying a literal turtle god. This backfired, however, as despite befriending crows on these isles, I had inadvertently set up a doomsday device to plunge this world into the ocean. We had limited time left, and the Alliance was still going to be pouring in to stop our escape. So, as the hero of our story, I had to buckle my newly found belts, plant my sword into a holster, and when things were looking bleak as ever for escaping this doomed island, it dawned on me. A new gun. My specialty, my skills, are finally coming through for me. There was no time to waste, and my first decree was to slaughter my ex-girlfriend for the shoes she stole from me in the breakup. The trade prince, that slimy bastard, was next on the chopping block. It was a hard-fought battle, but ultimately we forced him to yell uncle, and knowing that I could escape this island made me realize that I have the potential to become an absolute living legend. This escape enabled the first real task in cleaning up a troll empire, and now the responsibilities rest on my shoulders, and I'll need to work tactically if I want any chance to crack this case. It's time to get to work, and the first real piece of armor for champions allowed for a better grip on my gun. A gun that which found itself replaced with a staff and caused my skill level to drop dramatically. Well, as a hero, when you feel like you're not at your best, your second lesson is to send your support system, Turtle, to help you. So, with a sidekick in tow and an epic crash of the like button from all of you wanting this to succeed, we tried to solve some of Zul'Azar's most complex problems. A strategy was required to finish this zone in one piece, as setting such wards around the Empire would be helpful, and since my equipment and weapons were not set for this job, I took up an explosive shot to compensate for the lack of standard equipment. And believe me, this melee plan as a marksmanship hunter required a leap of faith, but there was a drive and a sort of ambition to keep pushing past formidable foes. After all, despite having to rely on auto attacks and a sidekick, we must accept that if we want to have a hero's journey, we'll also understand that arrangements will not always go our way, and that some not so bold tactics, such as camouflage, will need to assist in this conquest. Indeed, these ideas seemed to work as we took on boat pirates taking over kingly ships, and were knocking down some of the most grandiose enemies in Zul'Azar, all without having a pair of pants to our name. And despite our first real flounder coming at level 32, we seem to have found some stability in ensuring an empire will not entirely crumble on this day. However, empires are one thing, old gods are another. Do we have what it takes to defeat one? Comment below if you think a pantsless goblin can destroy the plans of the nefarious Cahoon. Already I find myself gimped as a head axe splits my damage in half, and although the foes were still going down, they survived the onslaught of abilities longer, and what's worse, my level 35 talent in Streamline did nothing to address the lack of skill stats for our marksmanship hunter using a melee weapon. Combine that with the lack of equipment and you've got an explosive recipe for some brutal death scenes. This leads to a hero's third learning pattern. A hero needs failure. You see, you can obtain some new items and show some possible models of success, but ultimately if you don't have failure, you can't push yourself forwards. You may not strive to become better, and that distinction separates the good heroes who acquire their sea legs from their pantsless counterparts. This doesn't mean you become the greatest who never dies. It may not even mean that you're good at the one thing you strive to become a hero at, and it may even require a lot of flops on the ground and charging back into the challenge to take it differently. However, after carrying that burden on your shoulders for some time, you too could find the mind and weapons to subvert the status quo completely. Who knows, maybe you could diversify your portfolio to annihilate the skills you wish to conquer and bring in a new skill such as post haste. Oh, and don't forget your allies along the way. They're there to help you. Oh, and also, yeah, I know. Wear your belt to a following interview. That'll help as well. Through that determination, we found ourselves climbing out of the final fights against an old god's minions, and with that, Nesmir's desire to raise an old god have been temporarily sated. However, our reign of heroic deeds must come together in some cohesion to conquest the sandy shores of Vol'dun. Can we apply our thinking caps and put together the lessons of a compelling hero? Initially, things weren't looking as hot as we failed to stop a pack of flesh eaters. However, we understand our newfound skills and turned this bad situation into a cup of victory. The ability to constantly learn also led to understanding of lethal shots and assisting my heroic crossbow against filthy evildoers. Everything learned from the past 3 lessons came into contact, and it seemed like mastery was on the horizon. And then, the unexpected occurred. Another axe, this time at a much higher level. The problem is, my skill to match this equipment was already at a staggering low for this apparatus. Seeing us have to put away our domineering strategy for a weaker one in essence, as well as the sudden decline of equipment, led to a 4th and sometimes harsh lesson to learn. That being, the cycle sometimes repeats. Another axe dropping couldn't have symbolized this better. We realized that there's no such thing as true mastery, and that cutting the recent skill gap does not mean we've learned everything there is to know. If you desire a hero's role, you won't find contentment in stagnation, which means more failures. The desire for mastery puts us in a possibly long obstacle course that may take some substantial time frames to complete, but through that, new opportunities not seen in previous foresights could become a possibility. Who knows, what starts off as a simple hobby through the repetition of the cycle may take on a fully fleshed out experience that builds enough satisfaction to the point where you in the real world could see your potential in the hands of another opportunity to explore your conquest once more. Oh, and you may even learn a volley of new tactics that no one has ever done. Vol'dun, as a result, topples under our grasp against all odds as the snake people tremble against our building heroic might. But as much as some things have seemed simplistic, the Shadowlands stretch will thoroughly test how well understand our full rules. The question is, are you ready to try? Because if you are, I'd like to ask you to subscribe and join this team for future challenges. Unfortunately, skills continue to show signs of gimping as yet another melee weapon drops off a mob. However, at this point we've familiarized that the biggest of foes will fall through facing these circumstances and not giving up. The efforts to supply yourself with endurance to motivate for a higher goal can lead to a trinket to hang onto your lapel, and even as a recording decides to blow up, not work, and you can't show the introduction to a new zone, you still push on with the determination to finish what you've started. With Bastion Conquer, we finally discovered the true mastery in overcoming struggle, as well as dealing with the forces of the Forsworn invasion. And now we have to ask ourselves what lessons pit the pommel in the land of the fallen. The first boss, to give us real trouble, is one that continually plagues our character. Not only is the damage ticking over time, but the cast is uninterruptible, spawning additional adds. Our psychic turtle couldn't taunt off the spell, and as a result we had to come up with a new strategy. And after several attempts and several adjustments, we finally discovered a simple technique to avoid the spell. Simply line of sighting the enemy and using what techniques are at our disposal allows for enough damage while avoiding the cast. And after an intense battle of back and forth, eventually our adversary falls to the new strategy. However, even with the success in this instance, failure still follows afterwards despite the suitable techniques. Ultimately, falling to different enemies through our heroic tales allows some form of humanity rather than a based image of perfection. And although I'd find death one more time at the hands of a Maul elite, I still managed to wrap up the last of the Maldraxxus line and mastered all of the arts of failure among the lines of the skeletal beings. A couple more layers of the mastery cake are upon us. Will Ardenweald challenge the lessons learned up to this point? The first real enemy continues to knock us down in a way that seems more focused on the outside of area effect abilities. However, we conquered that shortly afterwards, and with the surrounding support of friends, we acquired a new belt from the upcoming interview for the final levels. That is still coming at a regular rate, with each level increasing the difficulty to its peak. Yet there is a foundation that is standing up the final push to the end of this challenge, as well as giving this challenge new numbers to increase its potential in the future hero story. And that enforcement to my armor is all of you still watching. Despite my failures, I want to say thank you. Many of you are watching the potential foundation for some real support to something that would fall apart otherwise. I'll work to give more ideas so we can enjoy the game's inherent value to provide to the challenge, but also revel in the lessons it can teach us. And believe me, there's a lot I'm still learning to make the best content for all of you, but just like this character, with a supporting cast, no matter how many times I fall, I can always count on the support system built to keep me going. Ardenweald has taught us the lesson of community, which means Revendreth holds the final key to our desires. And while their lessons revolve around revelation, there is still one more sentiment to share. Taking on the final piece of equipment, I discovered that Revendreth takes on the power of repetition. We are implementing success and changing it to a different style. And if you're curious about how those different ideas evolve, then as we make our final set of good boy points, you'll want to check out this run where I push this challenge on my Affliction Warlock and see how I continue to make strides in my growth as a YouTuber, content creator, and entertainer.